Hello and welcome to the first of a series of monthly Hot Topic parliamentary specials in which our local MPs have agreed to act as our Westminster correspondents. This time I'm joined by the Conservative member for Cleethorpes and Immingham, Martin Vickers, first elected in 2010 and already recognised as an independently minded backbencher. Martin, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Hello.
January in the House of Commons, the beginning of the year has been quite dramatic down there. What should we start off with? I thought first of all the economy. George Osborne has been delivering some happy numbers, 1.9% growth in the economy. The mood of the House was quite harsh on Ed Balls.
Yes, I mean, Ed Balls has been struggling for some months now. The Labour Party had assumed that the growth was not going to return as rapidly as it is doing. And they've had to change tack on a couple of occasions. They had a good run for a few weeks with their energy freeze, but there's no way that was going to sustain them through this year and up until the election. So they've got to have a more coherent policy, and as yet they simply haven't got one.
And was this always the Conservative High Command strategy that about three-quarters of a way through the Parliament elected in 2010, there'd be good figures in the economy, and that always takes a bit of a lag before anybody feels the benefit from it, but in 15 months' time, the election, is everybody going to be feeling warm and toasty all over?
Well, as you say, I mean, when you go into a recession, it's probably a year or 18 months before the man in the street sort of feels the pinch. Likewise, we don't see the benefits for some time, but the growth figures are good. Local businessmen are much more upbeat. I was talking to a builder in Barton-on-Humber last Friday. He was telling me that the work's coming in thick and fast.
Well,
so it's a good sign.
Well, in this part of the world, your constituency and the neighbouring constituencies, the economic recovery is always a little more delayed even than it is behind the rest of the country. So are you, as a prospective Tory candidate in 2015, are you feeling quite confident about the economic consequences?
Well, as I say, it's the economy which sort of decides almost every election. And the feel-good factor, as we've just said, takes a bit of time to return. But whether it was a part of the plan, who knows? Because actually, I think it's ahead of plan, because I don't think the growth figures were expected to be quite as good as they are. If you'd have asked me 6 months ago, or even if you'd have asked the Chancellor 6 months ago, I think he would have been much more cautious. But as the independent forecasters are telling us, things are going well.
And as you would say, this is a consequence of the wise stewardship of the Conservative government, rather than just the natural cyclical nature of an economy.
Well, that's right. I mean, we had a plan, and Plan A, as George Osborne has stuck with Plan A and taken a bit of a beating.
Plan.
Exactly, he's taken a bit of a beating by everyone for a good couple of years, but he stuck firm, which we had to, because it's common sense, isn't it? People. The alternative, the Ed Balls plan, was spend more money to get out of debt. Well, people can relate that to their own household budget and think this is madness.
That's true, but there's a difference between a macroeconomic, big-term, long-term economic plan, and there is between our own household planning. And
well, of course.
Half a century of Keynesianism running economies in this country, and with governments of both colours.
Yes, well, that's true. I think perhaps the Thatcher government broke that particular mould.
But certainly, that's not controversial. Talking further of economics, the Labour Party has suggested a rise to a 50% tax for the very richest, for the people earning £150,000 or more, or having an income of that much. Whether they earn it is a different matter. I take it the Tory party has quite a strong view of that.
A mixed view, to be perfectly honest. Not mixed in the sense that we want to see lower taxes for everyone, but there were mixed views when we reduced 50 to 45. I was critical of the Chancellor at that time, because I thought, although I obviously want to see, low taxes for all, I think it was a hard sell politically, and perhaps a political mistake. I've argued as of many of my colleagues, that it's got to be the lower and middle income bracket that sees the benefit of the growth first. But having said that, you don't get the growth unless you retain the businessmen, you keep the entrepreneurs here. So there is a balance to be struck.
I'm no advocate for the millionaires, sadly, but it does seem very strange that with a 50% rate, even now with a 45% rate, top rate, that more than a third of the income tax revenue of the government is coming from 1% of the population.
Yeah, I mean, it is a staggering figure, which shows how inaccurate the reports are that stream through the media saying, oh, the millionaires are getting away with it and so on. And let's face it, as has been said many times, throughout the whole of the Labour government, except for the last 35 days, the tax rate was higher than it is now.
One more question about the Labour Party.
Lower than it is now, I should have said, yes.
One more question about the party across the floor from you. Ed Miliband is trying to change the rules about the leadership of the Labour Party. At the moment, it's a third elected by the unions, a third by party members, and a third by members of the Parliamentary Labour Party, the MPs. He wants it all to be done by the party members. Now, that's quite similar to the way the Conservative Party works, isn't it?
It is similar. There are disadvantages to it as well. I mean, the leader of the party primarily is the leader of the parliamentary party on a day-to-day basis, and if he doesn't have the confidence of his backbenchers, then he or she is going to struggle. So there has to be a balance. I was certainly an advocate for the present system we have in the Tory party.
But that also emasculated the parliamentary membership, as it were, and gave them then much less say in who led them, and you wound up having Michael Howard and Ian Duncan Smith.
Well, you don't choose the best examples, but yes, yeah. I mean, as I say, you've got to retain the confidence of the parliamentary party, and Ian, Michael Howard had the confidence because it was the parliamentary party that staged a bit of a coup to put him there, because IDS was failing.
Though, did it?
Well, we were always on course to lose the following election, if truth be known. With the defeat that we suffered in '97, it was always going to be a three-term Labour government unless they...
Oh, you could have told us that at the time. It would have made coverage so much simpler. Final, before we go to the break, about another party. The Liberal Democrats seem to have managed, as Lord Steele said the other day, to have had a sex scandal without anybody getting any sex. How have they got themselves into such a pickle?
It's incredible. I'm as baffled as everyone else is. The labyrinthine constitution of the Lib Dem party seems to take all power away from the leadership when they want to actually deal with a sort of internal crisis. I'm mystified.
But it is a sort of reflection on the whole of politics a little bit that of human weaknesses, which is what this is clearly about, seems to distract so much from any ideas of ideology or philosophy or policy, and that the whole of the politics depends on the personal drama rather than the intellect. Is that a healthy thing?
No, it's not healthy. We see it time and again. Every time there's a scandal of some description, the leadership, quite reasonably guilty, innocent till proven guilty, stands by the accused. The media frenzy gathers pace, and after a week or two, the leadership has to give in.
And everybody forgets about it 6 months later.
Well, they forget about it, but some injustices are done.
On that slightly sad note, we'll have to stop for a break. Please join us in a couple of minutes when we're back, and I'm talking again to Martin Vickers, MP. But you are, as well as a unionist, you are an English MP and a Tory, presumably hoping for as much Conservative government as possible. If Scotland were no longer to be sending people to Parliament, there is a guaranteed Conservative English majority in Parliament, majority governments eternally.
It's very tempting to argue that, but it's interesting to note that
Welcome back. I'm with Martin Vickers, Conservative MP for Cleethorpes and Immingham, reporting to us from Westminster. Martin, one of the other big stories in January affecting not, I suppose, Westminster, but Holyrood, the Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, went up to Scotland and gave some very ambiguous advice about how Scotland might be able to keep the pound should she decide to go independent.
Yes, I mean, the SNP are in a bit of a hole over this one. Of course, a few years ago, Alex Salmond and his team were saying we want to join the Euro. An independent Scotland would be a firm fixture in Europe and everything would be great. The Eurozone crisis came along and he quickly reversed back, fallback position, would join the pound. Well, of course, he would, or the Scottish government would be in the same position in the sterling zone as in the Eurozone. They'd have a currency which they had no control over. So it would be bad news for Scotland.
But you're an English MP. Would you think, as you're representing English taxpayers, the Bank of England is underwritten by funds provided by English taxpayers? Would that mean that if Scotland had a dreadful economy, rather as Greece now has, and it was being supported by an English bank, and its currency was being supported by an English bank supported by English taxpayers, that we'd be in the same position as Germany is in now in relation to Greece, and we'd find ourselves paying to support a foreign economy, a foreign currency.
There is a danger of that, and that would of course depend on the negotiations that followed a yes vote. And I think the English would strike a pretty hard bargain. They would hold the aces in this particular negotiation.
Well, it's a repetition of history, isn't it? It's old. You know, the Darien affair of the early 18th century and the 1707 Act of Union was on condition that England bailed out Scotland.
That's right.
Is this not just a? I mean, I'm very fond of the Scots. I make no comment on this.
Likewise, but there is considerable resentment among the English electorate that they feel they're subsidising Scotland to a greater extent, and they, in one sense, they're quite happy to let them float off because they think they'd be better off. I'm a unionist by instinct and think that we are all better together. England's position in the world would actually be a little bit diminished if we were not the United Kingdom of as existing now.
But you are, as well as a unionist, you are an English MP and a Tory, presumably hoping for as much Conservative government as possible. If Scotland were no longer to be sending people to Parliament, there is a guaranteed Conservative English majority in Parliament, majority governments internally.
It's very tempting to argue that, but it's interesting to note that from David Cameron down, the party has remained united on the fact that we want to remain Scotland to remain in the Union. So at a political cost, we feel that the UK and Britain as a whole would be better off.
Is that a sort of sentimentality? There's sort of 4 million people north of the border and they've got the prettier country, and it's a sort of sentimental...
I can't go along with the pretty country bit. It is a pretty country, but the Lincolnshire Wolds...
Well, all right then. They've got the whiskey.
Yes, true.
Okay. Well, we'll move on to an issue that might well, after this referendum, become relevant to the Scots as well as it is to all sorts of other people, the possibility of immigration. Will you just explain what happened in the recent immigration vote within the Tory party in Parliament?
Well, the immigration bill that's been going through for some months came back to the Commons this week. It's a very good bill in as much as it does what the overwhelming majority of the electorate want. They're tightening up on the access to benefits and services by those who've not contributed.
But what was the rebellion about?
Well, the rebellion was to do with stricter rules for the deportation of foreign criminals, and the government held fast because of the legal advice that they were getting, but they also realised that they were actually going to lose a vote, and so they, somewhat bizarrely, I admit, the government abstained and
so
left. The government is the front bench.
When you say the government, you mean all the members of the cabinet and all the junior ministers.
All the junior ministers.
So all the people who have to obey the Prime Minister or resign from their government position.
They abstained, and I think it was 97 Tories voted for Dominic Raab's amendment. Dominic Raab is an international lawyer by profession, and he put forward a very compelling case. But they relied on the government relied on the Labour Party to vote it down.
Were you part of the rebel cause?
I was part of the rebel cause.
And why am I not surprised?
Because I want to see a more robust approach to the whole of the immigration policies, and we're achieving that. This would have gone that little bit further.
A couple of issues come out of this, though, don't they? First of all, Mr. Raab is an international lawyer, but we know what lawyers can do with the law. If we were to have, if that rebellion were to have succeeded, that amendment would have gone through, then that would have put this country's law in breach of the European Charter of Human Rights.
Well, that was the government lawyer's opinion. And it wasn't Mr. Raab's opinion.
Well, but would you, in principle, would you be happy for the British sovereign parliament to legislate in defiance or in contradiction to international law?
Well, the European Convention has been interpreted and reinterpreted over the years.
Well, all law can be interpreted.
Indeed, to a far greater extent than the original authors of it. And I personally, I believe in the sovereignty of Parliament and the supremacy of our own legal system.
A second issue comes out of the vote last night, and you were one of the rebels. There was a risk that the government could have lost its vote in the House of Commons last night. Now, traditionally, the Constitutional Convention of our sovereign and unwritten constitution is that if the government loses its vote in the House of Commons, there's a vote of confidence in the government, and if it loses that, then there's a general election. Now, and it used to be only 30 or 40 years ago that you just have to lose one vote and you go to the country. Would you be willing to put at risk the present coalition government over an issue over which you wish to rebel?
No, because obviously I would support the government on a vote of confidence. The vote of confidence normally, the sort of accepted position is if they lose a vote of confidence on the second reading of a bill, in other words, a government commitment. This was actually just one clause within a bill, tightening up one particular clause. So I don't think the custom and practice has been that on those occasions you would expect a vote of confidence.
But would you be happy to rebel? And I think everybody admires a rebel, but would you be happy to be a rebel if it then risked that vote of confidence, and in a hung parliament, in a coalition government where there are a lot of Tory backbenchers who don't much like the government and lots of Liberal Democrat backbenchers who don't much like the government and don't like the marriage, would you be willing to risk putting the House to a vote of confidence with your rebellion?
Well, I don't see that there would be a risk of losing a vote of confidence. Yes, there are always, every government has restless backbenchers. I don't think there would be any possibility of Liberal or Conservative MPs not supporting the government in a vote of confidence.
Okay. Other parliaments are available. We're going to be re-electing the European Parliament in the next few months. Yes. Your party is at risk, the Conservative Party, of losing votes to UKIP. And you have a certain amount of sympathy with the central policies of UKIP, in that you'd like to come out. How will you be voting in the European elections?
Well, I should be voting Conservative, of course. I mean, the European Parliament, it has a completely different role. What actually matters in terms of our future in Europe is what happens at the general election. And at the general election, it will be a Conservative commitment for the 2017 in-out referendum. And I'm very happy with that. It's a perfectly sensible policy. Over the years, I voted to have a referendum a little sooner than that. But we are only 18 months away from a general election now. It's a perfectly sensible policy to go into the election and say we'll renegotiate and put the outcome to a vote.
Okay, well, on that note, Martin Vickers, thank you very much for briefing us on Westminster throughout January.
Thank you very much.
And I'll see you next month.
Okay, look forward to it.
That's all we have time for this time. Please tune in next week for another point of view. Until then.